This is part 3 of chapter 76. Despite Marx's hyper-philosophic, hyper-polemical style, there is a grandeur, a wit, and a poignancy to his view of history. Quote, Christian socialism, he says, is but the holy water with which the priest consecrates the heart-burnings of the aristocrat, end of quote. By his ways of asking, he awakens us to ignorance that we had never recognized. He thought he was definitively mapping the whole human past. He was really a discoverer of terra incognita, only a Columbus, whose followers liked to think of him as a Vespucci. Mocking the professionally sanctified cliches of historians before him, he was a latter-day Paracelsus. While he outraged by his questions, he could not satisfy by his answers. Quote, the hand mill gives you society with the feudal lord, the steam mill, society with the industrial capitalist. End of quote. And other more outlandish, oversimplified, but always illuminating connections. His questions opened hidden dimensions of history. After Marx, even non-Marxist historians could never be satisfied by all the old answers. Marxists came to call the discovery of these hidden dimensions their science of society, which they offered as a kind of therapy. To discover the simple truth that, quote, the ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of the ruling class, end of quote, Marx argued would eventually liberate the modern proletariat from the ideas of their ruling class and from the illusion that these were universal truths. Understanding history was not only one way to knowledge, it was the only way. Just as the convert to Jesus was freed from pagan gods, so the convert to Marx would be freed from enslavement to idols fabricated by those who controlled the machinery of production. St. Augustine had cast Christianity into a historical credo, taking direction from a unique event and moving toward a divine end. Quote, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free, end of quote. Marxists would not dissent from the axiom of St. John, for Marx, like St. Augustine and Vico, believed that the cure for man's feeling of powerlessness was knowledge of the true course of history. Again, history had become therapy. Quite other hidden dimensions of the past were discovered by Sigmund Freud, 1856 to 1939. No vagrant or political organizer, he led a quiet scholar's life in Vienna, where he lived from the age of 3. His father, a wool merchant of free-thinking liberal political views, had difficulty supporting the family. Like Marx, Freud was born a Jew, but unlike Marx, he never became an anti-Semite. He was an active member of the B'nai B'rith Society and was fond of Jewish anecdotes. In anti-Semitic Vienna, Freud's Jewishness always limited his opportunities and never ceased to affect his thinking. An industrious and successful student, he first inclined to study law. He recalled his interests as he entered the university in 1873. Quote, neither at that time nor indeed in my later life did I feel any particular predilection for the career of a physician. I was moved rather by a sort of curiosity, which was, however, directed more toward human concerns than toward natural objects. Nor had I grasped the importance of observation as one of the best means of gratifying it. My early familiarity with the Bible story, at a time almost before I had learnt the art of reading, had, as I recognized much later, an enduring effect upon the direction of my interest. At the same time, the theories of Darwin, which were then of topical interest, strongly attracted me, for they held out hopes of an extraordinary advance in our understanding of the world. And it was hearing Goethe's beautiful essay on nature read aloud at a popular lecture just before I left school that decided me to become a medical student. End of quote. For Freud, as for Marx, it was a broad humanistic interest that led him to pioneer on the borderlands of science. The mysterious character of all human experience, as Bruno Bettelheim has observed, was what intrigued Freud and finally captured his energies. This explained, too, why he moved on from treating man's body to treating his soul. Freud began his professional career in a physiology laboratory, trying to confirm Hermann Helmholtz's axiom that, quote, no other forces than the common physical-chemical ones are active within the organism, end of quote. This experience Freud described in his autobiography as, quote, a detour over the natural sciences, medicine, and psychotherapy, from those cultural problems which had once captivated the youth who had barely awakened to deeper thought, end of quote. His life work would be less in the spirit of Helmholtz than of Goethe. The young Freud's studies at the Sperl Gymnasium in Vienna from the age of 9 until 17 bore a heavy emphasis on Greek and Latin, and he remained a lifelong passionate devotee of the classics. His most influential writings were replete with Greek words and connotations. Eros and Oedipus and Psyche, Greek for soul, among many others. From his early years, and despite his financial difficulties, Freud's hobby was collecting antique statues, which were, apart from his 20 cigars a day, his only extravagance. When he bought himself a copy of Schliemann's Troy, he was delighted by the author's account of his childhood hope to uncover the buried city. This Freud generalized into a lesson for his own life and for the very foundations of psychoanalysis. Quote, the man was happy when he found the treasures of Priam, since the only happiness is the satisfaction of a childhood wish, end of quote. His own definition of happiness was, quote, the subsequent fulfillment of a prehistoric wish. That is why wealth brings so little happiness. Money was not a wish in my childhood, end of quote. The charm of classical antiquity was a leitmotif in his life, as he noted his delight at acquiring a Roman statue in Innsbruck in 1898, or the pleasures of reading Burckhardt's Cultural History of Greece. The great travel experiences of his life were visits to Rome and to Athens, another focus for his omnivorous interest in origins. Freud, identifying himself with the Semitic Hannibal, likened his difficulties in reaching Rome to the clerical anti-Semitism that had denied him a university professorship in Vienna. When, on the first of many visits, he finally arrived in Rome in 1901, he was entranced by the antiquities of the Vatican Museum, especially the Laocoon and the Apollo Belvedere. In Athens, his visit to the Acropolis left him in dazzled disbelief that anything could be so beautiful, a feeling that he never lost. When Freud set out for America, apparently his primary interest, apart from seeing Niagara Falls, was to view the famous collection of Cyprus relics in New York. At the Metropolitan Museum, again, his focus was on the Greek antiquities. In Vienna, his consulting room and his famous study were lined with cabinets holding his collection. Even the narrow writing desk was cluttered with little statues, mostly Egyptian, which he would replace from time to time with items from his cabinets. Freud's interest in archaeology, more than a hobby, expressed his quest for our whole unacknowledged inheritance from the past. When in his 40s he turned from the world of Helmholtz and neurology to the world of culture and history, he committed himself to the archaeology of the soul, the psyche. The unexamined strata of experience, both of society and of the individual, were his digging ground. Quote, every earlier stage of development, he observed, persists alongside the later stage which has arisen from it, end of quote. For him, our unexcavated memories were the artifacts of human archaeology, which of course was one reason why he gave such importance to recapturing the experiences of childhood. The central problems of human life, according to Freud, are in its hidden dimensions. Quote, in mental life, nothing which has once been formed can perish. Everything is somehow preserved, end of quote. Freud saw human frustrations and conflicts arising not from what man had forgotten, but from the embedded memories of which he was not conscious. Could the old arts of memory now be turned to the service of man's self-discovery? Discovering the past would be not merely a delightful experience, but a way of liberation. Psychoanalysis would be a way of curing the self by reviving memories and remembering that they are only memories. Those suffering from hysterics, quote, cannot get free of the past, and for its sake, they neglect what is real and immediate, end of quote. The problem of all neurotics was that they were, quote, anchored somewhere in their past, end of quote. For Freud, knowing one's inner history became therapy. No physical chemical equations could ever explain human life, for memory was the peculiarly human ingredient, and unless the strata of experience were uncovered, neither a society nor an individual could know itself. Freud, in his way too, would be a Paracelsus. The incurable ills of the spirit must have their remedies. The professionals would be shaken by the amateur spirit of Freud's psyche analysis. Freud remained a humanist and a man of letters among the test tubes. Immersed in classical literature, he was vividly aware of the beloved of Eros, the mythical Greek girl Psyche, who was so beautiful that the jealous Venus put her to sleep. He never would distill the fertile literary vagueness and ambivalences from his language or his method. When American doctors wanted to restrict the practice of psychoanalysis to trained physicians, Freud strenuously objected to, quote, the obvious American tendency to turn psychoanalysis into a mere housemaid of psychiatry, end of quote. He seems to have chosen his favorite terms because of their literary redolence. On more than one occasion, he protested against those who would translate his Ich, the I, and his Es, the it, and psyche analysis, the analysis of the soul itself, into a speciously precise jargon of egos, ids, and superegos. Psyche, Freud observed as early as 1905, is a Greek word, and its German translation is soul. Psychical treatment hence means treatment of the soul. And here there is a long German quote, which I will spare you because my German is bad. Ironically, in the United States, where Freud was first publicly acclaimed, his ideas were promptly made a preserve of a medical science, and so emptied of the mystery of the prehistoric past that Freud had discovered in everybody. And that concludes chapter 76. Have a lovely day.